last time I saw my brother, he looked me right in the eyes as he left me for dead. There was no anger in his expression, no flicker of regret, just a cold, empty finality, like closing a ledger on a bad debt. And the worst part? He did it for money. My money. The $200,000 I gave him to save his dream. If you have ever poured your entire heart, your savings, your very soul into your family only to have them throw it back in your face, then you understand the kind of searing pain I'm talking about. My story is a warning, but it's also a story of how I clawed my way back from the absolute edge. If you believe that justice isn't just a fantasy, but something worth fighting for, then hit that subscribe button right now. This channel isn't just for listeners, it's for survivors. And our story starts here. But before I could become a survivor, I had to be a victim. And it all began, ironically, with a moment of overwhelming pride. It was the 1-year anniversary of his restaurant, Elan. From my apartment 3 hours away, I watched its success unfold online. Glowing reviews in Boston magazines, Instagram posts from local celebrities, a wait list that was a month long. My brother, Julian, had done it. He had built his masterpiece. I picked up my phone, my fingers flying across the screen as I typed out a message. Elan's 1-year anniversary. The reviews are incredible. So proud of you, little brother. I hit send. A warm, genuine smile spreading across my face. My apartment, usually a sanctuary of quiet focus for my writing, suddenly felt too big, too silent. The minimalist furniture and the floor-to-ceiling windows showing a city skyline felt sterile. Success is a lonely thing when you have no one to share it with. A moment later, my phone buzzed. My heart leaped, but it wasn't a reply. It was just the notification. Read. 8:14 p.m. I stared at that single, dismissive word. Read. Nothing else. He's busy, I told myself instantly. It's the busiest night of the year for him. He'll reply later. But as the minutes turned into an hour, then 2, the silence from my phone began to feel deafening. The warmth in my chest curdled into a familiar, hollow ache. It pulled me back a year, to a small, cluttered coffee shop. I could still smell the burnt espresso and hear the desperation in his voice as he laid out his disaster. He was about to lose everything. The restaurant, his reputation, all of it. He just needed a bridge loan. He'd sworn, just to get him through a rough patch. $200,000, my entire nest egg, the money I'd painstakingly saved from a decade of bestsellers and sleepless nights. I'll pay you back every single cent. Clara, I swear on our parents' memory, he'd said, his eyes welling with tears. And like always, I gave in. Because that's who I was. Clara, the responsible older sister, the guardian, the backstop for all of Julian's charming, reckless mistakes. Now, sitting in the gloom of my living room, that memory felt tainted. A story I was once paid to write, about a family betrayal, echoed in my mind. In that story, a brother left a sister for dead in the wilderness. I shook my head, trying to banish the absurd thought. This was my life, not some cheap thriller. My own brother wouldn't abandon me emotionally, let alone physically. Right. The idea that my brother left me for dead was still unimaginable, but in that deafening silence, the seed of that terror had been planted. I stood up, the decision forming before I was even conscious of it. I wasn't going to sit here and spiral. I wasn't going to let this distance fester. I would drive down to Boston. I'd walk right into his beautiful, successful restaurant. And I would surprise him. I would look him in the eye and make him remember the woman who made his dream possible. I just didn't know that I was driving straight into a trap, one that had been set for me a long, long time ago. Chakchan Roy, Toi se tiep tuk kau chuyen, Viet chuang, tu theo jung, dani jath hong hat, chuang, nai se jiao sao, vao kwa ku, Lamro, nguang gochkwa, muikwan he jok he, giwa he, chi em. Giup khan, gia jong kam sao, sak voi clara, va hiu. Juok tai sao su fan boy, sao, nai lay jiao, John Jen Wei. You see, to understand how I ended up alone in that cabin, you have to understand the family I came from. Or rather, the family I was forced to build from the ashes of the one we lost. Our parents were gone too soon, in a car accident that felt like a movie cliché until it was your own life. I was 18, legally an adult, but emotionally still a kid. And suddenly, I was the legal guardian to my 12-year-old brother, Julian. He was the artist, the dreamer, the golden boy. He had our mother's charming smile and our father's flair for the dramatic. Neighbors brought over casseroles and cooed over how brave little Julian was, how his sad, soulful eyes just broke their hearts. And me, I was just Clara, the responsible one, the one who had to figure out how to pay the mortgage on a high school diploma and a part-time waitressing job, the one who sat at the kitchen table night after night, surrounded by bills and insurance paperwork I didn't understand, while Julian was in his room sketching designs for fantastical restaurants he'd own one day. Our dynamic was set in stone that first year. He was the one who needed protecting, and I was the one who had to protect him. It became my entire identity. I remember one afternoon. I was probably 19, and I came home from a double shift absolutely exhausted. I'd been saving for months, putting every spare dollar into a cracked vase I kept on my dresser. It was my college fund. I had this dream of studying art history, of being surrounded by the beauty and stories of the past. That vase held about $800, which felt like $1 million to me then. When I walked into my room, the vase was gone. My heart plummeted. I found Julian in the backyard, a small fire crackling in a metal trash can. He was burning his report card. He'd failed 3 classes. The school had called our emergency contact me, but I was at work. So they had called our aunt, who had screamed at him for an hour about how he was throwing his life away. Julian, who could never handle criticism, had a full-blown meltdown. In his panic, he'd grabbed the first heavy thing he could find to smash the lock on our dad's old liquor cabinet, my vase. My $800 in shards on the floor, forgotten. When I confronted him, he just cried. He didn't apologize for the money. He cried because he was a failure, because Aunt Carol was a monster, because he missed Mom and Dad. And what did I do? I held him. I told him it was okay, that we'd figure it out. I spent the next 2 hours sweeping up the pieces of my shattered dream, both literally and figuratively. I never mentioned the money again. I just took on more shifts. College could wait. Julian's fragile spirit couldn't. That became the pattern for the next decade. Julian's crisis. Clara's solution. He wanted to go to a prestigious culinary school in New York, the kind of place that cost more per semester than I made in a year. I had just gotten my first big break, a modest advance for my debut novel. It was supposed to be the down payment on a small condo, my first real home. Instead, I wired it all to the school for his tuition deposit. I told myself it was an investment in his future. He was brilliant. After all, he deserved a shot. I could always write another book, make more money. He only had one chance to become the chef he was meant to be. When he graduated, he came back with stars in his eyes and a woman on his arm, Serafina. She was beautiful, polished, and ambitious in a way that felt sharp and dangerous to me. She looked at Julian not like a partner, but like a prize racehorse she was betting on. She appraised my small apartment with a quick, dismissive glance and complimented my writing in a way that made it sound like a quaint little hobby. I didn't like her, but Julian was in love. He said she understood his vision, and his vision was Elan. It was a magnificent, audacious dream of a restaurant. He showed me the blueprints, the concept art. his eyes burning with a passion I hadn't seen since he was a boy sketching on napkins at our kitchen table. The problem was, it required a staggering amount of capital. "We have investors. Clara," he'd explained, his voice smooth and confident. Serafina's influence was all over him. "But we're a little short on the initial build-out. Just a small gap. A small gap, it turned out, was $200,000. I should have said no. Every rational part of my brain, every scraped-together dollar from my past, screamed at me to say no. I was 40 years old. I had my own life, my own future to think about. But then he looked at me, and for a second, the confident man disappeared, and I saw the 12-year-old boy with the bad report card, terrified and lost. "You're the only one I can trust." "Clara," he'd said, his voice barely a whisper. "You've always been the only one who believed in me." It was emotional blackmail, expertly delivered. He was leveraging our entire shared history of his mistakes and my sacrifices. He was reminding me that my role was to be his guardian, his savior, and like a fool, I stepped right back into it. The contract I made him sign, the one that gave me the house as collateral, felt like a pathetic attempt at being a responsible adult. It was a safety net I prayed I would never need, because deep down, I didn't want to be his creditor. I just wanted to be his sister. I wanted, for once, for my investment in him to pay off. Not in money, but in seeing him happy and successful. I wanted him to finally be the man I had sacrificed so much for him to become. So as I packed a small overnight bag that night, the silence from my phone felt less like an oversight and more like a symptom of a disease I had ignored for 20 years. I had enabled him. I had taught him that his actions had no consequences, because I would always be there to absorb them. I zipped up my bag, a cold knot of dread in my stomach. I wasn't just driving to Boston to get an answer to a text message. I was driving there to find out if the brother I had spent my entire life protecting even existed anymore. That 3-hour drive to Boston was a blur of highway hypnosis and a churning stomach. To really understand the weight of that $200,000, the weight I was carrying in my car with me that night, you need to know that it wasn't just money I had sitting in a bank account. It wasn't a number on a screen. It was a pound of my flesh. It was the price of my soul, sold over 6 agonizing months. A year before, after Julian's tearful plea in that coffee shop, I had gone home and done the math. My savings could cover about half of what he needed. The other 100,000, it might as well have been 1 million. I was a successful author, but I wasn't a titan of industry. My income came in waves, tied to advances and royalty checks. I didn't have that kind of liquid cash. Then, as if the universe was testing me, an email landed in my inbox. It was from my agent, a ghostwriting opportunity. The subject line just said, "High-profile gig, urgent." The client was a reality TV star, a woman whose entire brand was built on manufactured drama and a carefully curated image of opulent victimhood. She wanted to write a memoir about her struggles. The pay was astronomical, exactly $100,000, plus a bonus on completion. The catch, the deadline was brutal. A finished manuscript in 6 months? Normally, I would have deleted the email without a second thought. My work was my own. My name, my stories, they were the only things I truly possessed. Being a ghostwriter, especially for someone so vapid, felt like a betrayal of my craft. But as I stared at the number on the screen, all I could see was Julian's face. This wasn't for me. This was for him. This was the solution. I told my agent I'd do it. Those 6 months were the closest I've ever come to hell. The work wasn't just writing, it was emotional archaeology on a toxic waste dump. I spent 8 hours a day on Zoom calls, listening to this woman recount stories of backstabbing her co-stars and feuding with her family, all while framing herself as a tragic, misunderstood heroine. She'd cry crocodile tears while describing which multi-million-dollar mansion she was forced to sell in her divorce. My job was to take this sludge of narcissism and spin it into a compelling narrative of resilience. It was intellectually and emotionally draining. I lived and breathed her fabricated life. My own apartment became a cave, plastered with timelines of her feuds, maps of her relationships, notes on her favorite designer brands to sprinkle into the prose. I stopped sleeping more than 4 hours a night. My diet consisted of coffee and whatever I could eat with one hand while typing with the other. The novel I had been working on, my passion project, a story I'd been crafting for 3 years, sat untouched on my hard drive. When I tried to open the file, the characters felt like strangers. Their voices were drowned out by the shrill, self-serving monologue of the woman paying my bills. About 2 months into this nightmare, I saw the first Instagram post. I was taking a rare 5-minute break, scrolling through my phone to feel some connection to the outside world. And there it was. A photo from Julian's account. It was him and Serafina, clinking champagne glasses on a ski lift in Aspen, both decked out in brand new designer ski gear. They looked like models in a magazine. My stomach twisted. The caption read, "Much needed inspiration trip for Elon's winter menu, taking in the fresh mountain air. Chef life. Aspen. Blessed Aspen." I thought, ski gear that costs more than my mortgage payment, I called him, my voice tighter than I intended. "Hey, saw your pictures from Aspen. Looks amazing." I started, trying to sound casual. "Clara, hey, yeah, it's incredible. We had to get away. The stress of the restaurant. You know, Serafina found an amazing deal on the flights," he said, his voice breezy and distant. "A deal? Huh, Julian? That trip looks expensive. I thought things were tight." There was a pause. When he spoke again, the warmth was gone, replaced by a defensive chill. "It's market research. Clara, you have to spend money to make money. I'm tasting food, meeting with suppliers, seeing how the top-tier places do it. Is that a problem I thought you believed in my vision?" And there it was. That old, familiar guilt. He twisted my genuine concern into an attack on his dream, casting me as the unsupportive, pragmatic sister who just didn't get it. I felt myself shrink. "No, of course not." I stammered. "I was just surprised. Have fun. Be safe." I hung up, feeling sick, but I pushed it down. He's under pressure, I told myself. He's just trying to build a brand. I turned back to my laptop and forced myself to write a heart-wrenching chapter about how my client felt when her personal chef bought the wrong brand of kale. The posts kept coming. A weekend trip to Napa Valley for a wine sourcing expedition, complete with a photo of Serafina sporting a new Cartier watch. A business dinner at a Michelin-starred restaurant in New York that ended with a blurry selfie of them in the back of a limo. Each post was a small, sharp jab to my gut. Here I was, literally bleeding my soul onto a page for a woman I despised, all to fund this performance. It wasn't about the restaurant anymore. It was about an image they were building with my money, with my sacrifice. The breaking point for me came late one Tuesday night. I was on hour 14 of a writing marathon, trying to meet a chapter deadline. My eyes were burning, my back was a single knot of pain, and I felt a profound sense of loneliness, the kind that feels like you're the only person awake in the entire world. I took a sip of cold coffee and saw a new post from Serafina. It was a close-up of Julian's wrist, adorned with a stunning, ridiculously expensive timepiece. The caption read, "Surprised the genius with an early anniversary present. He's been working so hard. He deserves the world." Hublot. Time for success. My man. I stared at the photo, at the gleaming metal and intricate gears of a watch that cost more than my car, and I just snapped. I closed the laptop, my hand shaking with a rage so pure it felt like ice in my veins. The exhaustion, the resentment, The feeling of being played for a fool, it all coalesced into a single, blinding moment of clarity. This wasn't a rescue mission. This was a heist, and I was the bank. But what could I do? I was already in too deep. The ghostwriting contract was ironclad. If I backed out now, I'd lose everything and still be on the hook for breach of contract. Julian had me trapped. So I did the only thing I could. I reopened the laptop. I channeled all of my rage, all of my pain and betrayal into the work. I wrote with a furious, desperate energy. The prose became sharper, the fabricated emotions more poignant. I finished the last chapter 3 weeks ahead of schedule. The celebrity client was ecstatic. She called it a masterpiece of modern memoir. The bonus was wired to my account the next day. I didn't feel a shred of triumph. I felt hollowed out, like a husk. I sat at my computer, opened my banking app, and set up the final wire transfer to Julian's business account. As I typed in the amount, my finger hovered over the confirmation button. A voice screamed in my head, "Don't do it. It's a mistake." But the image of that 12-year-old boy, lost and crying in the backyard, flashed in my mind one last time. I closed my eyes and hit send. It was done. I had held up my end of the bargain. I had sacrificed my own dream, my own sanity, to make his a reality. And as I started my car and pointed it toward Boston that night, I was going to get some damn appreciation for it. I was going to make him look me in the eye and acknowledge what I had done. That was all I wanted. Or so I thought. Of course. Here is chapter 4, continuing directly from the previous chapter. This is the turning point, where the simmering tension explodes into open betrayal. Written to be fast-paced, climactic, and utterly devastating, just as outlined. I pulled up across the street from Elon a little after 10 o'clock. The restaurant was a jewel box of light and sound, spilling warmth onto the cold Boston sidewalk. Through the massive plate glass windows, I could see a sea of people laughing, drinking, their faces illuminated by candlelight. It was everything Julian had ever described, everything I had paid for. My exhaustion from the drive was replaced by a nervous flutter in my chest. I took a deep breath, smoothed down my jacket, and pasted on a bright, hopeful smile. This would be good. This would fix things. The moment I stepped inside, the hostess, a young woman with a practiced, detached smile, tried to stop me. "Do you have a reservation, ma'am?" Before I could answer, Serafina spotted me from across the room. Her eyes widened, not with pleasure, but with a flicker of pure, unadulterated panic. It was there for only a second before being replaced by a dazzling, camera-ready smile. She glided towards me, intercepting me before I could get any further into the dining room. "Clara!" "Oh my God! What a surprise!" she exclaimed, her voice a little too loud. She wrapped her arms around me in a hug that felt like being gripped by a mannequin, stiff, cold, and for show. Julian appeared a moment later, wiping his hands on his apron. His smile was just as forced as his wife's. "Clara, wow. You should have called," he said. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a reprimand. "I wanted to surprise you for the anniversary," I said, my own smile starting to feel brittle. "Congratulations. The place looks incredible." "Thanks," he mumbled, his eyes darting around the room. "Anywhere but at me? Listen, we're completely slammed. I can't really talk." "Oh, I know. I won't keep you. I just wanted to see it. To see you." Serafina jumped in, her hand gripping my arm. "Actually," she said, her mind clearly racing, "we were just about to close up and head out for the weekend. A last-minute getaway to a cabin a friend lent us in the White Mountains. To celebrate. You should come with us. It'll be the perfect chance to really catch up." I was taken aback. A getaway. Now. It felt frantic. But the alternative was getting back in my car and driving 3 hours home, feeling like a fool. And a part of me, the stupid, hopeful part, thought maybe she was right. Maybe a weekend away from all this chaos was exactly what we needed. Are you sure I don't want to impose? Don't be ridiculous, Julian said, finally managing a convincing smile. It'll be fun. Just like old times. An hour later, I was in the back of their Range Rover, watching the city lights of Boston recede in the rearview mirror. My own car was left in a garage, a detail Julian had insisted upon. The tension in the car was thick enough to choke on. Serafina sat in the passenger seat, scrolling silently and furiously through her phone, the screen's glow casting an icy light on her face. Julian drove, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, his jaw clenched. The easy charm he'd displayed at the restaurant had evaporated, leaving a tense, irritable stranger in his place. My attempts at conversation died in the suffocating silence. The further we drove, the darker and more remote the scenery became. The highway gave way to a 2-lane road, and then to a winding, unlit path through a dense forest. My cell phone lost service. A knot of pure dread began to tighten in my stomach. This didn't feel like a celebration. It felt like an abduction. We finally pulled up to a small, isolated cabin. It was rustic and dark, the only light coming from our headlights cutting through the blackness. Inside, it was cold and smelled of dust and damp wood. Julian didn't turn on more than a single, dim lamp. "I'm going to get some firewood," he said, and disappeared out the back door. Serafina didn't sit down. She stood in the middle of the room, arms crossed, and finally looked at me. Her expression was stripped of all pretense. It was pure, undisguised contempt. "We need to talk about the money." "Clara," she said, her voice flat and hard. "What about the money?" I asked, my own voice barely a whisper. "The money's gone. All of it. The restaurant is still a financial black hole. We're in debt up to our eyes." I stared at her, my mind refusing to process her words. "Gone," Julian said. "The reviews, the wait list. It's a performance," she snapped. "It's all for show. The watches, the trips, all of it. You have to look successful to attract more investors. You, of all people, should understand that. You write fiction for a living." The cruelty of that statement was like a physical blow. Just then, Julian came back in, his arms empty. He hadn't been getting firewood. "Clara," he said, his voice devoid of any warmth. "We need you to tear up the contract." I felt the floor drop out from under me. "Tear it up, Julian. That's $200,000 of my—" "It was a gift," he interrupted, his voice rising. "A sister helping her brother, family. You can't put a price on that." "I didn't put a price on it." "You did," I said, my own voice finally finding its strength, laced with disbelief and fury. "You came to me. You begged me. I have spent my entire life cleaning up your messes, funding your dreams. That contract is the only thing that protects me." "No." The answer is no. I saw something shift behind Julian's eyes. The charming, lost little boy I had protected for so long vanished completely. In his place was a man I had never seen before, a cold, resentful stranger. He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a low, menacing tone. "You know, I used to feel guilty about it, taking your money, but I don't anymore, because you never just gave it. Did you? There were always strings. Always this quiet judgment. You wanted me to be grateful. You wanted me to owe you." He let out a short, bitter laugh. "You always were selfish, Clara. It was always about you." I couldn't breathe. The accusation, so twisted and unfair, literally stole the air from my lungs. Before I could even form a response, Serafina moved. She walked to the small table where I had placed my purse and my phone. She picked them both up. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice trembling. Julian walked over to the hook by the door and took my car keys. "We're giving you what you've always wanted," he said, his voice eerily calm. "A chance to be the martyr. The tragic hero of your own little story? He opened the cabin door. The cold night air rushed in. "You're leaving me here," I whispered. The horror of the situation finally crashing down on me, in the middle of nowhere, with no phone, no car, no anything. "You're a writer," Serafina said with a smirk, holding my purse. "You're resourceful. You'll figure it out." Julian looked at me one last time, his eyes as empty and dark as the forest outside. Then he turned and walked out. Serafina followed, pulling the door shut behind them with a soft, final click. I stood there, frozen in the dim light, listening to the sound of their car engine starting. I watched through the grimy window as the headlights cut a path through the trees, and then they were gone, their red taillights shrinking into the darkness until there was nothing left. Nothing but me, the suffocating silence, and the chilling realization that my own brother, the boy I had raised, had just left me for dead. For a long time, I didn't move. I just stood in that dim, cold room, my entire being focused on the pinpricks of red taillights until they were swallowed by the indifferent darkness. And then, there was nothing. The silence that followed was a physical thing. It was heavier than a blanket, pressing in on my ears, on my chest, making it hard to breathe. In that moment, the full weight of what they had done landed on me. This wasn't just leaving me behind. This was a death sentence, delivered with a casual, cruel smile. They didn't think I would figure it out. They thought I would die here. The first enemy wasn't the forest. It was the cold. It was a damp, insidious cold that crept up from the floorboards and sank its teeth into my bones. My hands started to shake, then my arms, then my whole body was trembling in violent, uncontrollable shudders. My first rational thought was a primal one, warmth. I stumbled through the dark, my hands fumbling along the rough wooden walls, searching for a blanket, a closet, anything. I found a thin, moth-eaten quilt in a dusty chest and wrapped it around my shoulders. It did almost nothing. I huddled on the rickety sofa, trying to make myself as small as possible, and I listened. I listened for the sound of their car returning. A part of me, the stupid, hopeful, sisterly part that I now realized was a terminal disease, prayed that this was some kind of sick, twisted joke, that they would come back, laughing, and tell me I needed to lighten up. But the only sound was the wind whispering through the pines and the frantic, rabbit-fast thumping of my own heart. And then I heard it. A sound from outside. A heavy crack, like a thick branch snapping under an immense weight. My head shot up. My breath caught in my throat. Julian. I crept to the window, my body still shaking, and peered out into the inky blackness. There was a little moonlight filtering through the trees, just enough to make out shapes and shadows. I saw nothing. I told myself it was an animal, a deer probably. Nothing to be afraid of. Then I heard the scratching. It was low, at the base of the cabin door. It wasn't the sound of a squirrel or a raccoon. It was a deep, powerful scraping, the sound of long, thick claws dragging against old wood. My blood turned to ice. I backed away from the door, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle a scream. A shadow fell across the window. It was massive, broad, and terrifyingly solid. It blotted out the moonlight for a second as it moved past, and then I heard a new sound, a low, guttural huff as it returned to the door. I saw the brass doorknob rattle. It wasn't just sniffing around, it was trying to get in. Every horror movie cliché, every campfire story I'd ever heard flashed through my mind, but this wasn't a story. This was real. Panic, pure and electric, seized me. For a second, I was paralyzed, just a frozen statue of terror. Then, something else took over, an instinct I didn't know I possessed. The part of me that had been a guardian, a protector for 20 years, finally turned its attention inward. It screamed one simple command, survive. My eyes darted around the dark room. The heavy oak table in the center, the cast iron fireplace poker, the pots and pans hanging by the sink. My mind, which had felt so foggy with shock and grief just moments before, was now razor sharp. I didn't have a weapon, but I could make a fortress. I grabbed the table, adrenaline giving me a strength I didn't know I had, and heaved it against the door. The legs scraped and groaned against the floor, the sound deafening in the silence. The scratching outside stopped. There was another huff, louder this time, followed by a heavy thud as the bear threw its weight against the door. The entire cabin shuddered. The wood groaned. I wasn't going to die cowering in a corner. I scrambled to the kitchenette, grabbing 2 heavy skillets. I stood in the middle of the room, my back to the far wall, and I started banging them together. Clang, clang, clang. The noise was jarring, a violent, metallic scream that shattered the night. I yelled, my voice raw with terror and rage. Get out of here! Go on! Get out! Ah, the pounding on the door continued, a terrifying counter-rhythm to my desperate clangor. I could hear the wood splintering. Any second, I thought. That door is going to give way. But I just kept banging, kept screaming, pouring every ounce of my fear and fury into the noise. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. I stood there, panting, the skillets trembling in my hands, listening. Silence. A minute passed, then another. I heard a final, frustrated grunt from outside, and then the sound of something heavy moving away, crashing through the underbrush until it faded into the night. I didn't move from that spot. I sank to the floor, my back against the wall, the skillet still clutched in my hands. I stayed like that all night, huddled in the freezing dark, listening to every creak of the cabin, every whisper of the wind, convinced it was coming back. The sun was just beginning to cast a weak, gray light through the window when I heard a new sound, a sharp, repeated rapping on the door. My eyes shot open. It was a human knock. A voice called out, clear and steady. Hello, park ranger. Is anyone in there, Tears? I didn't know I had left began to stream down my face. I tried to stand, but my legs were stiff and useless. I crawled to the door, my body screaming in protest, and with numb fingers, I helped push the heavy table away. When I finally pulled the door open, a man in a crisp ranger uniform stood there, his hand raised to knock again. He took one look at me, at my pale, tear-streaked face, my trembling body wrapped in a filthy quilt. The barricaded door and his professional, friendly expression vanished. He looked past me. Then his eyes went wide as he saw the deep, splintering claw marks gouged into the outside of the door. He looked back down at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of horror and a kind of protective anger. My God, he said, his voice low and serious. What on earth happened to you? And in that moment, hearing my terror validated in a stranger's voice, the fear finally broke, and something else, something cold and hard and clear, began to take its place. Rage. Of course. Here is Chapter 6 continuing Clara's journey from a victim of a horrific betrayal to the architect of her own justice. The tone is sharp, empowered, and focused, written to be a deeply satisfying turning point for the audience. The ranger's name was Frank. He was a kind, middle-aged man with gentle eyes that couldn't hide his professional fury at what had happened. He gave me a thick wool blanket and a thermos of hot, sweet coffee that burned my tongue and brought tears to my eyes. He wanted to take me to the hospital, to the police. I refused. I knew, with a certainty that felt like it had been forged in the freezing darkness of that cabin, that the justice I needed wouldn't be found in a police report. It would be found in a legal contract. He drove me to the nearest town, a tiny speck on the map with a bus station and a diner. He bought me a ticket to Boston and pressed a $20 bill into my hand. For breakfast, he said. I looked at this stranger, this man who had shown me more compassion in 1 hour than my own brother had in a lifetime, and for the first time, I felt the ice inside me crack, just for a second. "Thank you, Frank," I said, my voice hoarse. He just nodded. "You take care of yourself now." On the bus to Boston. I didn't cry. I didn't sleep. I just stared out the window as the wild, menacing forest gave way to sleepy suburbs, and then to the hard, steel and glass reality of the city. The terror of the long night was receding, replaced by something else. Something cold, clear, and sharp as a shard of ice. A plan. I didn't go to a friend's house. I didn't even go to my own car. I took a taxi from the bus station to a sleek, anonymous hotel in the financial district and checked in under my own name. The room was sterile, modern, and overlooked the harbor. It was a perfect, silent, empty space to plot a war. The first call I made was to my lawyer. Her name is Margaret, a woman in her 60s with a reputation for being a shark in a Chanel suit. "Clara," she said, her voice crisp. "I wasn't expecting to hear from you. How are things with Julian's restaurant?" I took a deep breath. He left me for dead in a cabin in the White Mountains last night. Margaret. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. I told her everything, from the ignored text message to the bear at the door. My voice was flat, devoid of emotion, like I was recounting the plot of a book. When I finished, she didn't offer sympathy. She offered something better. "What do you want to do?" "Clara," she asked. "I want to enforce the contract," I said, my voice low and steady. The default clause. "I want the restaurant." I could almost hear her smile through the phone. "I'll have the papers drawn up. We can serve them by Monday." "No," I said. "I want to do it tomorrow. Saturday night. During their busiest service." Another pause. This one filled with what sounded like professional admiration. "I'll cancel my dinner plans," she said. The next day, I didn't hide. I didn't cower. I walked out of that hotel and into the high-end department store across the street. I bought a new outfit. Not a comfortable, forgiving writer's outfit, but armor. A sharply tailored black dress, heels that made me feel 2 inches taller and 100 times more powerful, and a deep red lipstick that felt like a declaration of war. As I looked at my reflection in the dressing room mirror, I didn't recognize the trembling woman from the cabin. I saw someone else. Someone I hadn't seen in a very long time. At exactly 8:30 that night, Margaret and I walked through the doors of Elan. The place was packed, a symphony of clinking glasses, low music, and the confident buzz of Boston's elite. It was the picture of success, a beautiful, glittering lie that I had paid for with my spirit. We spotted them holding court at the best table in the house, schmoozing with some local real estate mogul. Julian, laughing, looking every bit the celebrity chef. Serafina, draped in silk, playing the part of the perfect, supportive wife. They didn't see us coming, not until we were standing right beside their table. Julian looked up, and his smile froze on his face. The color drained from his cheeks. Serafina's eyes widened, a flicker of the same panic I'd seen the night before, but this time, it was laced with genuine fear. "Clara," Julian stammered, starting to rise. "What? What are you doing here?" I didn't say a word. I just looked at him. I let him see the abyss in my eyes, the ghost of the woman he had abandoned in the woods. Margaret placed a thick, bound document on the pristine white tablecloth with a soft, definitive thud. "Julian and Serafina Kane," she said, her voice cutting through the nearby chatter. "You are being served. This document enacts the default clause of the $200,000 loan provided by my client, Ms. Clara Hayes, as you have failed to provide evidence of repayment and have, in fact, acted in extreme bad faith, ownership of this establishment, Elon LLC, its assets, and its liabilities. Transfers to her, effective immediately. You could have heard a pin drop. The real estate mogul stared, his mouth agape. Serafina looked at the document as if it were a bomb. Julian just stared at me, his face a mask of disbelief. You can't do this, he whispered. And that's when I finally spoke. My voice was quiet, calm, and carried more weight than any scream. I can, I said, and I am. As of this moment, every glass, every chair, every bottle of wine in this building belongs to me. I let that hang in the air for a moment before delivering the final blow. And my first act as the new owner is to terminate your employment. Both of you. You have 5 minutes to collect your personal belongings from the office. Then I want you to get out of my restaurant. The silence that followed their exit was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. For a full minute, the entire restaurant was frozen. 100 pairs of eyes locked on me. I stood there, in the center of the room, my heart hammering against my ribs. And in that moment, standing in the wreckage of my brother's dream, I realized I had a choice. I could let this place crumble, sell it for parts, and walk away from the ashes. Or I could build something new. 6 months later, if you were to walk past that same address, you wouldn't see the cold, pretentious facade of Elan. You would see a place with warm light spilling from its windows, the sound of soft chatter and laughter drifting onto the street. You would see a sign, hand-carved from reclaimed wood, that reads, The Storyteller's Cafe. That's where I am now, writing this. I'm sitting at my favorite table in the back corner, the one that looks out over the whole room. The air smells like fresh coffee, old books, and cinnamon bread. The walls are lined with bookshelves, crammed with novels donated by patrons. There's a quiet corner where a young couple is sharing a slice of pie, and a large communal table where a book club is having a lively debate. My staff, many of whom chose to stay after that night, move with an easy, genuine warmth. They're not just employees, they're the family I chose. This place isn't just a business. It's the home I built for myself after the one I knew was burned to the ground. It's a testament to the idea that the most beautiful things can grow from the deepest wounds. I did finish my novel, right here at this table. It's the best thing I've ever written. It's a story about a woman who learns that strength isn't about how much you can endure for others, but about how fiercely you're willing to fight for yourself. As for Julian and Serafina, I heard they filed for bankruptcy a few months ago. I heard they divorced not long after that, the pressure of their shared deceit finally consuming them. I saw Julian once, about a month ago. He was standing across the street, looking thin and defeated, just staring at the cafe. He saw me notice him, and he quickly turned and walked away. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sadness. I felt nothing at all. And that's how I knew I was truly free. What my brother never understood is that family isn't an obligation you're born into. It's not a debt to be endlessly paid by the person who loves more. It's a choice. It's a garden you have to tend to every single day. He thought that by abandoning me in the woods, he was taking away my world. He didn't realize he was just clearing the land, giving me a chance to finally plant a garden of my own. My story had an ending, but I know for so many of you watching right now, you're still in the middle of yours. You're in the cabin, listening to the scratching at the door. You're on the phone, hearing the excuses. You're looking at the empty chair at the dinner table where a family member should be. And I want you to hear this. You are not alone. This channel is more than just a place to listen to stories. It is a gathering place. It is a community for every single person who has ever been betrayed, who has ever been made to feel small, who has had to fight for their own survival when the people who were supposed to protect them became the monsters. When you subscribe, you're not just getting another video in your feed. You are raising your hand and declaring, I am not a victim. I am a survivor. You are joining a space where our stories are our strength and our scars are proof that we fought and we won. So if you are ready to turn your pain into your power, then do it now. Hit that subscribe button, turn on the notifications, and leave a comment telling me you're here, because your story matters, and we are just getting started.